Hello, everybody. Hi, and welcome to today's webinar about microaggressions and how to handle them. So this webinar is hosted by CloudKettle, and we're going to be talking today about with Jennifer Dell. My name is Sara. My pronouns are they, them, and my role is Corporate Partnerships Manager at QueerTech. So before we get started with the webinar, we'd like to take a moment and begin by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. So I'm going to take a moment and to do the land acknowledgement. So while we meet on a virtual platform, we want to acknowledge the importance of the land which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations, and to improving our own understanding of local indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. I come to you today from Jogjoge, or Montreal, and acknowledge that I am located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of these lands and waters. So please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each, in our own way, move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you so much. Like I said, this webinar is sponsored by CloudKettle. CloudKettle is a company from Halifax, a team of sales, service, and marketing cloud experts. CloudKettle helps enterprises drive revenue with the Salesforce and Google ecosystems. I would also like to take a moment and thank all of our sponsors for QueerTech. So these are our corporate partners who work with QueerTech throughout the year on the diversity and inclusion strategy, and also on reaching and making connections with the community. If you are interested in becoming a corporate partner, please reach out to me. My email is sara@queertech.org. So Sara, my name without an H, at queertech.org, just like our website. All right. So now is the time to welcome everybody to the platform. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar about microaggressions. If you're watching on social channels, feel free to comment or ask questions, and we'll address what you're saying during the conversation. And do know that we obviously encourage engagement and questions and comments, and that if we happen to highlight on the screen one of your comments or questions, your name and photo will show on the screen from the social channels. So just so you know that. Yeah, and so now is a good time to start the conversation and welcome Jennifer Dell to this broadcast. Hi, Jen.
Hello, hello. Thank you, thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Candidly, don't tell the people watching, I'm a little nervous, but generally very excited to do this.
That's cool. That's cool. Awesome. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking today about microaggressions. I'm very excited. You are the VP of Operations for CloudKettle. Very excited to get to know you better, and also to hear your vast experience in operations and also in the tech industry. So for starters, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. So for those that are joining, my name is Jennifer Dell. My pronouns are she, her. Like Sara mentioned, I am the VP of Operations at CloudKettle. I've been here for about 3 years and actually joined as a project manager. So shout out to CloudKettle for being a great place to work and continue to grow your career. I've been working and leading teams for 13 years so far, most of those being in the tech industry. So the tech industry for the last decade. I have worked in co-located teams, non-co-located teams. I've worked at small startups, big enterprises, just a wide variety of things, and got to experience kind of what it's like being a member of the LGBTQIA community in a bunch of different environments, and learning to how to navigate that area, and then also to make a safe space for others in the community.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's a great opportunity today to talk about all this. So before we kind of venture into our main topic for today, which is microaggressions, and before we look at it from all different angles, I want to just kind of do a deeper dive into your experience. I know you've worked in the in web application development. You also worked in digital marketing. You're also a part of the product experts team program at Google.
Correct.
So yeah, so can you tell us a little bit more about kind of some of those experiences, and also in the first place, how did you get into tech and what inspired you to that?
Yeah, so tech was actually not something I ever thought I would see myself doing. My family loves to tell the tale of like growing up, I was always, oh, I don't understand things. I wanted to play a video game. I'd have to have, one of my siblings come and set it up for me. So I kind of stumbled my way into this. I was working in insurance, which is not the most exciting industry. And an opportunity came up at the company I was with that they wanted to build an online quoting tool. So essentially take an insurance broker and make them digital so that you didn't have to call in. So you could get a quote on home, auto, or travel insurance online and still get a good price and have it be underwritten and all of that. Being in that industry, they brought me in to actually be an SME, which is a subject matter expert. So I was brought into this project. I was supposed to stay on it for 6 months. And the intention was that I would help them be sound on the insurance side. What they didn't realize is that they unleashed something in me. So I got in there, I realized, okay, I kind of love this. The way that you have to think in order to work in tech, the way you have to break things down, just really clicked with how my brain functioned. So that 6 month engagement turned into me progressing in my career with them. I stayed with them for 6 years. And by the time I left, I was actually running the web applications department. So I went from being the not even techie person on that team to running that team.
Yeah.
From there, I kind of just followed my passions. So web applications was really cool, but a big part of web applications is about driving traffic to your site. So that naturally led me into doing digital marketing. So SEO on the site, also paid media campaigns, which was great. I am a big believer in self-learning. So in order for me to learn digital marketing, I started spending time hanging out on forums like Google product forums, asking questions like, what is a cookie? And never that bad, I promise. And then I found out, oh no, I end up liking this a lot too. So I went from asking the questions to answering the questions to being invited to join the Google Product Expert Program, which is where they essentially like certify you that yes, you know what you're talking about. You can help do QA on beta programs. You can write support articles. You can respond for Google on social. Very, very cool experience.
Awesome. That's so cool. And a lot of what you're saying is kind of, I mean, it sounds like you have changed careers several times.
Yes.
And I find that really inspiring because it's funny, like when I went to school, I was taught by professors who did not think that this was possible. They just, in their world, it exists, you change careers.
Yeah, you pick a path.
Yeah, you take that. And then I graduated and I was like, okay, what now? And then I like switched careers over, and then I realized that that's actually now the standard, especially in tech. Like there's so much pivoting and why not, right? Like we can learn new things, we can grow, change. It's okay to change. It's okay to change your mind. And I feel like some of the kind of previous generations, we still hear from them that, like it used to be that you could have one job for 40 years and then retire.
Yeah, you stick with one company to retirement.
Yeah. And like, do you feel like this reality exists anymore? And
No.
How is your,
No,
right?
I think people that are always learning, growing, and evolving. And so for me, my professional path actually mirrors kind of my personal path. So for me, I didn't actually come out until I was in my 30s. So, in my 20s, I was involved in heterosexual relationships. I was convinced that I was straight. That was my path. But again, as you grow and as you learn and as you're exposed to more situations in life, who you are and how you view the world changes. Right. So a big thing for me, and it wasn't Schitt's Creek, but I love this line now when David goes, I love the wine, not the label. I think that is the perfect way of explaining it. But to your point, no, I don't think that people can pick a career and stay on it forever. I don't think people can pick a company and stay there forever. I think life is about exploring and learning who you are and being open to realizing that that can change at any point.
Yeah. And I mean, that's like the best part about life. and like being alive, right? Like being alive is actually kind of being present, being like, oh, what is this? I'm curious. What is this new thing? And how can we experience new things when we only kind of focus on the old existing and kind of not making space for something that can completely change how we think about things.
I would
Cool,
say this
awesome.
even ties into what we're going to talk about today, right? Like microaggressions. For me, one of the big takeaways when I think about microaggressions is recognizing that they're often coming from a place where somebody doesn't know, right? It's an unconscious bias. They're not aware from it. It's ignorance, it's lack of understanding. And so that curiosity and being open and willing to discuss and explore things, I'm a big believer of when we know better, we do better.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's kind of dive into microaggressions. How would you define a microaggression?
And I think that's a great question. So I know I'd mentioned to you this prior, but in preparation for this, or kind of in discussion at my team, one of the questions that came up is people went like, I don't even know what a microaggression really counts like, or if they're familiar with the term, they might not be aware of how it relates to our community. So I think that definition is great to dive into. And in my mind, it's a subtle, typically unintentioned form of discrimination and bias, and it's directed towards a marginalized community. And again, I want to stress that it's that unintentional side of it. So it's often ignorance, it's lack of understanding. They just don't know better. They haven't had the experience and they don't know what they say and how it impacts you or I. And those little microaggressions can manifest in a bunch of ways. So it can be verbal remarks, it can be gestures, it can be facial expressions, and it can even be like systematic practices, although that's much bigger. In case that wasn't clear, a few examples, and I don't want to go into them too much because let's be honest, we're trying to avoid these things, but just so that you know and you can recognize it, and for the allies on the call so that you can be aware of some things that are triggers for us. So for me, one of the ones that I've experienced more than any of the others would be assuming heterosexuality. Right. So Sarah, I know I'd shared with you onboarding at one of my companies, the question was husband, boyfriend. And then immediately put me on the spot of like, well, neither. And how do you go into there? Another a very common one is that stereotyping and the tokenism, right? So assuming that we are a homogenous group, that within our role, each person you speak to has standard traits, and that if you talk to one, they're speaking for their entire community. And again, prior to this call, you and I were chatting that that's just not the case. Invasive curiosity is also another common one. Asking who wears the pants in your relationships, asking somebody who's transitioning, very invasive questions about what they're going or where they're at in their transition. And then another one that I don't think people are often aware of is that the dismissing or the ignoring of experiences. So in the first side of that, it can be something of, oh, well, you just haven't met the right guy yet. Or when somebody does speak up about something happening, unfortunately, it's not uncommon to hear, oh, well, you're being too sensitive. They didn't mean it that way. And kind of dismissing what it meant to you or I.
I understand. And so how, so these are some of the examples that you've experienced in the workplace. I mean, we've all experienced it. And I feel like when it comes to microaggressions conversation, it's important to underline how they are microaggressions. So they are micro.
Yes.
So if you look at it as an isolated incident, it's not like a big deal, right? Objectively. But what happens with people from marginalized communities is that when there's 1,000 of them, like there's that one that kind of is like the feather that broke the camel's back, or like it's just so too much, and so I feel like that's what's kind of important to underline, because people often kind of don't understand the maybe kind of like the disproportionate reaction or response to the microaggression. And how would you say that how do you handle microaggressions today in your
so you actually touched on one of my biggest pieces of recommendation. So before you respond externally, I do think it's important that you have a little bit of a check with yourself. And so the two checks I think that you need to do with yourself is, one, exactly what you've said. recognize that sometimes your response is because you're thinking about the cumulative experiences that you've had when somebody misgenders you, when somebody assumes heterosexuality, when it's one of these little microaggressions. For you, that might be the third time it's happened today. Right? So before you deal with a situation, keep in mind that you want to deal with this situation, this person who has behaved this way. And again, most likely unintentionally, they don't know about all of that thing that you're carrying with. So make sure that you're only responding to the most recent the most recent offense, and not bringing with you kind of, and I don't use this word lightly, but your trauma from all of these experiences.
Yeah.
The second check that I like people to do is assume positive intent, right? Like I mentioned to you, these are often unintentional things. People just don't know better. Recognize that social interactions are somewhat inherently awkward. A lot of these for me happen in the get to know you phases. So maybe that person has social anxiety and is just fumbling over their words, and they're sitting there feeling like they put their foot in their mouth, right? While there are some hateful people in this world, the vast majority of people are good, and these small things they don't know what they're doing. So do those two checks with yourself. Keep it limited to the current experience, the current situation, and then always try to look at it from that view of positive intent. Once you've done those little self checks, how you deal externally, I think, is very personal to you. So for me, my preference and how I handle things is I respond assertively, but respectively. So if you feel safe and comfortable, and for me, in my current role and at my age and just where I am in life, I'm comfortable having those conversations, but I recognize that everybody isn't. So if you feel safe and comfortable doing so, address it directly. And this is where I love to tie in my psychology background, but use I statements. I feel when you, because a lot of these times when we're trying to deal with a microaggression, we're not trying to call someone out, we're trying to invite them in. So if you use I statements, you're helping them be aware of what your experience is, how you see things, and how it affected you. What you're not doing is making it about them and putting them on the defensive right away. So if you said, you offended me when you did this, that person's immediately going to have that pause, right? That initial reaction of like, whoa, you're coming at me. But if you say, I felt offended, it switches it a little bit more and it lets it be a dialogue versus you attacking them.
This is amazing. And is this something that we could practice, like the I statement? So let's say your colleague faces a situation where they get, for example, misgendered, or they get asked about something that assumes their heterosexuality. So this person would say, when I heard you say that, I felt sad that you don't see me, or not, because you don't see me is a judgment, right? Or
well, so you can say that because you do at some point have to say what they have done. You can remove the you though, right? I feel, not seen when someone, like you can use the when someone versus the what you did when, someone misgenders me, right? You don't know this, and you can even put it this way, recognize that they probably didn't know better. You don't know this, but this actually happens to me about 5 times a day, and the impact it has on me is so significant. I find myself struggling to shake it off. I take it home after work, and I know that wasn't your intention. So I want to make sure that you know what it's like from my side and how that was received.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to add is that having this conversation, it's very good to try and do this like one-on-one.
Yes, not in a group.
Because you don't want to make it more uncomfortable than necessary for the person, and it's less likely that they'll be defensive if you're one-on-one. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for for practicing this for me, because I am aware that that some people are very good at communicating with other human beings, and some people like me need help to need concrete examples. So I wanted to kind of go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and that's part of it, right? We're gonna talk about, how we make this happen for everybody across the way. And one of the things is, talking to allies, talking to people with similar experiences, spending time in our community so that you can share these stories and people can pick up tips and tricks from each other.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to, kind of have a part of the conversation where kind of we talk to allies and some of the ways in which they can support and help create an
Yeah.
inclusive environment. But I just want to say that kind of like pull back a little bit because Jennifer, you're successful, you're amazing, you're thriving
Thank
your
you.
life. CloudKettle is a fantastic environment for people to work in. But what would you say to like a colleague from another environment or a person who is kind of facing microaggressions in an environment that is not as inclusive? Because sometimes it happens that we're facing microaggressions, but there isn't even that it's not even possible to do that one-on-one, or it's not it's just feels like you're getting attacked, but you're also like you have no room to move, right? And you feel like maybe you feel like mentally it's not the best day, it's not the best month, it's not the best year. Just like Friends, right? The I just remembered. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So what would be your advice to like a younger colleague that that is telling you this? How would you what advice would you give them?
Oh, fantastic question. So, while yes, my personal preference is that, responding in the moment in real time directly to the person. If you're not in an environment that welcomes that, there are a couple other ways that you can handle it. So, one, seek support from allies. So, after the fact, discuss what happened with somebody that knows and understands, and that provides you that kind of validation and emotional support. I'm also a big believer of this because if you seek support from allies, then the allies are more likely to understand what you're going through and speak up in case they see it themselves. And I think that is a huge component. It can't just be us that's saying, this isn't okay, you shouldn't do this. Our allies need to be doing that as well, right? So if somebody's misgendered, it's honestly sometimes even better if like you don't correct them and somebody else swoops in and like, oh, no, she goes by they, them, or she. See, exactly, like having somebody step in and kind of address it for you is fantastic. The other thing that I recommend if you're in a situation where you can't deal with it directly is, and again, we'll talk about in the coming thing, but any really healthy supporting environment is going to have a mechanism in place in which you can report these incidences. So whether it's reporting it to your boss, your manager, an HR area, they'll have that. And then finally, the third thing to consider is that most employees or most companies these days have an EAP, which is an employee assistance program. And those you can certainly call and talk about your experiences and get some, suggestions and counseling on both of how to deal with it. And then also, how to address it.
Yeah, this is amazing. I love your talk to allies and report it in HR, and then find other ways to kind of address that within the company. So I really want to go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say, and as a kind of last resort, and this is honestly not so much for the microaggressions, but for the true discrimination and harassment, you can also go external to get support in that, right? If you are truly facing discrimination at work, do not be afraid to go out and have somebody help you fight for your rights, because nobody deserves to be treated like that.
Yeah, and I feel like your first point about talking to allies is really really important, especially to do it like as soon as possible when you start feeling this way, because there's this thing where when microaggression happens or when aggression happens, like we focus, obviously the focus is on the person who did this, the focus that might spread into other people and the environment, but the focus is on the negative. But if you shift the focus to the allies, so to the people who actually, if you express your experience to them, that they will support you, then actually, you start to kind of create more of allyship and create more of support for yourself rather than more of kind of the other thing.
Again, we're trying to invite people in. We're not trying to call them out. We're trying to create a community.
Exactly. Awesome. Cool. Great. So, so how do you feel about kind of shifting the conversation a little bit to allyship, and how can allies kind of support the people from the community to kind of handle microaggressions?
Yeah. So in my mind, it's not even just to call it allyship is a little bit too narrow for me, because I think the organization, regardless of whether or not they'd use that term allyship, should have in place policies and procedures to address with this. So in my mind, how we address these microaggressions and how we start to create that better world that we want to live in requires effort from the individuals, whether they be a member of the community, whether they be an ally, or just working at an employee. And then I think organizations themselves have a certain amount of responsibilities. At the core of all of it is about education and awareness. Again, if we go back to our initial point, right, these are often unintentional things that come from just they don't know better. When we know better, we do better. So making sure that you have training and awareness about microaggressions, what is their impact? So that can be training, workshops, seminars, and the goal there that you want to have is in fostering understanding, empathy, and allyship. Whatever that education and awareness is, there are 3 topics that I personally believe everyone should go through. So one is unconscious bias, right? Everybody likes to think that bias is this bad word, and if you're biased, you're bad. And it's like, no, spend a little bit of time learning about it, and you'll recognize that like you naturally gravitate people who are like yourself. So you need to recognize that and then put policies in place to deal with it. So unconscious bias is definitely one I would recommend. The second thing would be, no, please go ahead.
Yeah, because I mean, we do live in this culture where ignorance is kind of shamed. So, right? So it's like it's almost like it's shameful not to know, whereas like it's human not to know.
Exactly. Exactly. So the first would be making sure that there's some sort of training or awareness about unconscious bias. The second one would be privilege, right? Recognizing how privilege comes into play, recognizing how privilege has impacted your own experience. And then the third piece is inclusive language. And for me, inclusive language is a huge, huge one, because when you start at a company, when you start working somewhere, language is often your first kind of cue about what sort of environment you found yourself in and how hospitable is it going to be for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I feel like in a lot of these points that you're saying, so addressing unconscious bias and learning about what biases we hold, and then also kind of recognizing privilege and checking it, having that having that practice with ourselves, and then also kind of using inclusive language and being mindful and aware of how we express and how we create space for everybody to be included. I feel like in a lot of these points, they really point out to how sometimes to how important it is to kind of consider that all learning, right? And maybe people who are not from the community, don't have a vested interest in learning about, all the, all the information about the 2S LGBTQ plus community, about like gender and sexual identity, and so on. So, and we also cannot forget that like until 20 years ago, all of this that we're talking about was super taboo, like super. So like I think when we're talking about microaggressions or discrimination, of course there's, um, of course there's people who have like negative intentions and so on, but they're actually a lot less numerous than we think. A lot, like the biggest number of people are the people who are just a little bit confused and maybe a little bit scared as well.
Yeah.
And so kind of all this advice is, I think, really useful in kind of just opening up the space for people to ask simple questions, right? For example, QueerTech is doing the allyship training for 4 times a year. And this is a 75-minute virtual training for our partners. And there we kind of talk, it's a training on how to become a better ally, on how to kind of support US LGBTQ plus people. And I call it a safe space to ask simple questions because it just, it goes over the basics, like the alphabet, what does it mean? What are all the ways to come out, and all the how to address certain things, what to ask, what not to ask, and also there's a testimony of a person who's transitioned at work at the end. So this is a great space to kind of just level the playing field and kind of also just make sure that we're bringing everybody along for the ride that we're all riding, right? And what are some of the resources that you're aware of as a leader in this in this topic?
Well, so you already called out what is my personal favorite one, and that is what you guys are doing. And I'm not just saying that because you invited me to speak, but also the whole reason that I am speaking is because my company did attend one of your allyship training sessions that you started, and that's what really prompted this conversation. So the work that you guys are doing is definitely vastly important, and I think that you're really building that community and making resources for people. So first and foremost, I would say you guys. The second thing I'd recommend is if you are employed, there's likely going to be kind of 2 resources that are available through your employer. So the first would be an employee resource group or an ERG. So that can be a platform for mentoring, for networking, advocacy, creating that community. The second one I've already spoken about, and that's an EAP or an employee assistance plan. So that's a place that you can go to, again, for counsel, for advice, or to just raise the issues that you have. Those, by the way, are always free and typically confidential. So if you go to an EAP and you complain about something your employer doesn't get back a notice that said Jennifer Dell called us and said that you were, saying hateful things. So that is a safe route to go. Additionally, there are, some additional companies that are doing similar work for you. So safespacealliance.com, right? That is also, a group that's run by our community. They help people identify, navigate, and again, create those safe places. Pride at Work Canada is fantastic. And then 2 ones that I think are often ignored, but I'm a big fan of. So meetup.com is fantastic if you are somebody that actually wants to get out and meet your community. And then if you're more of a stay at home but want to have a community feel, Discord. There are fantastic Discord servers out there where there is that community, where there is that conversation, and it can be done from your phone, from your desk, wherever.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for kind of offering a wide array of options, both for people who are very social and for people who are maybe more introverted. And so we're going to kind of open it up for questions from the audience soon. But before we do that, I wanted to kind of, everybody out there on social channels, feel free to blast your questions or comments. Now's the time. And then Jennifer, before we look that over, in your own company, what are some of the ways in which you are kind of, walking the talk, and what are some of the resources that you have available for people from our communities?
Yeah, I am a big believer in CloudKettle. I even wore the t-shirt so that throughout this entire thing, you could know who I was repping. But they are a fantastic company, and we truly do believe in fostering a culture of respect and inclusion. So we have set policies and procedures in place against discrimination and harassment, and that's not just for our community, but for all marginalized communities across the place. You know, we ensure that we work and partner with companies like yourself and like iSands to ensure, again, that we're addressing diversity and inclusion. We internally have a number of training in place. So right now, in fact, the training is implicit bias. It is a self-study course that we do through HR Downloads, and every member of the team is to go through there, in addition to doing kind of one-on-one online training, which I think is great because it gives you a chance to reflect. We also typically bring in people and do group sessions because sometimes you need to look at the material and have that internal reflection and think about you in a safe place. But then it's also good to have that community training as well so people can share their stories and we can get to know each other. Unofficially, you are very much encouraged to bring your authentic self to work. So one of the things I love is every new hire at CloudKettle has to prepare a presentation to introduce themselves to the company. So that's a chance to, you know, get your pronouns out there, to talk about your experiences, what's important to you, what do you love. We even do something called Chart of the Week. And while it's not necessarily a chart and it doesn't have to be about, you know, a super serious matter to you, it is a chance for every employee, every Kettler to come forward and kind of show off something that's interesting to them. For me, I actually did one, and this might sound silly, on drag race slang, but part of the reason I did it is I was trying to kind of feel out the environment to see if this was a safe space, and using drag race, which is kind of a link between our community and others, right? It seems like a safe place. Everybody can agree it was great. It let me gauge responses. And then we have Slack channels that are dedicated to, you know, all of our unique interests, hobbies, beliefs, practices, and things like that, where we can have those communications. Additionally, CloudKettle is a big believer in second acts or second careers. So we like to recognize that we want to be a diverse and inclusive place, which means we can't be hiring the same type of people over and over again. Some of our most successful people are people who came here as a second career. They weren't working in tech, like myself. To help people bridge into tech, we offer a lot of training. So, you know, we'll take part in something called Salesforce Saturdays or marketing automation training, and that lets people who don't have a background in tech get free training so that they can start a career in tech. Most of our team members are mentors, so they work closely with people to lead them in. And then the biggest thing that we have is that we make sure that our team represents the world that we live in, and that's reflected in the leadership level. So if you have a diverse and inclusive, you know, group of employees, but it starts getting more and more homogenous as you move your way up the corporate ladder, that's a problem.
I understand. That's so cool. And tell us more about Salesforce Saturdays. So it's a free training, and you get to have you get to have like another career after that.
Yeah. So while I think it's a fantastic event, I will admit that I am not the one that leads it, and I am not the technical person. I live on the operations side of the house. I don't have the talent and skill that those folks do. I do know that it's a training that I don't know if we actually are the official runners of it or just members of our team participate in it. If any Kettlers are on the chat, feel free to jump in with a save. And if not, Sarah, I'll make sure that we have the content over to you following the session.
Sounds good. Yeah. And if you can just tell us how long is the training, or comments can maybe pitch in. And then I also, before we go into questions, there's a question from Kat. Where do we find Discord servers? So we've linked our QueerTech Discord servers that are on fire. There's also our QueerTech digital community. So if you go to our website, queertech.org, you can sign up for the digital community. So, you know, create like a simple a profile to log in. And once that's done, you're in our digital community, which kind of opens up a huge window to sort of like a social network for queer tech people, for cuties. So we
does look like someone from my company came in with the save. So if you want to know more about Salesforce Saturdays, it has been posted in channel. Thank you, Adam.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Cool. So yeah, like I said, the QueerTech digital community, you can access a bunch of resources there. There's forums, there's other people to connect with. There's companies who have job opportunities open. There's articles, blogs, this type of webinars. There's a QD podcast, and of course, our numerous events coming up almost every month in different places across Canada. So we're about ready for some questions from the audience.
And thanks, Ashan, for the second one.
Cool. Awesome. So anyone curious about anything that we went over today?
Oh no, the painful silence. That either means one of two things. We did such a fantastic job that we answered every question possible, or people just aren't comfortable. And one thing actually I do want to note when we talk about resources, my LinkedIn DMs are always open. If you guys have questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. If there was something that you wanted to discuss or say, and you didn't feel comfortable in this public environment, I'm here.
So, so there is one question from the team here about addressing microaggressions, and specifically, kind of how do we navigate microaggressions when there's a power dynamic?
Yeah. And I think that's a fantastic one. So when there's a power dynamic, again, this is one where I'm going to speak from personal experience, but then I'm going to give something else. I tend to ignore them. I recognize at our core, we're all people, to use the cliche, we all put our pants on one leg at a time, or whatever you want to say. Like, so for me, even if somebody is multiple levels above me in terms of things, I recognize they're still a human. And that doesn't mean that what I'm thinking or feeling doesn't have value and that they shouldn't hear it. So I would continue to address it immediately. Now, if you're not safe, then again, I go back to those other options. Go talk out to your allies, right? Seek that support, build that community, right? Report it if you feel that it's worth reporting. And sometimes, again, reporting isn't that you're trying to get somebody in trouble, it's that awareness. So if you don't feel comfortable having that conversation, sometimes you're reporting it so that somebody who is at their level can have that conversation for you and start to kind of begin that conversation, get that person thinking so that you don't have to do it directly. And then the third one, I'm blanking, so let's go with the two. Talk to your allies and report it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I feel like, yeah, when there's power dynamic, I mean, yeah, I mean, like you said, it's always like a shift between, you know, we're all humans, and that's something that I've learned at school, you know, that even like the people with like big titles or like a lot of power, influence, they're also people, right? They're also humans. They also have, you know, like they walk and talk and eat the same way and so on. So, but at the same time, obviously, like when we talk about power dynamics, obviously there's things that the power is very real, right?
Yes.
You can, you know, it is sometimes a matter of safety, of stability.
Yes.
So I think it's important to have options, like you said. So there's one more comment saying this was great. The book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is a good read with touches
I love that
on
one.
Yeah, that one is like a treasure chest of wisdom right there. It talks about so many things, and thank you so much for that suggestion. Cool. So we thank you so much for coming. And we're going to be ending the webinar, and we're going to be sashaying away. Soon.
Love it.
So
the throwback, you brought it full circle.
Yeah. So just to end by sharing some of the resources that we'll post in the comments. Feel free to check them out. The Discord channels, the information about trainings, books, and all that. Jennifer Dell, thank you so much today for this webinar. Thank you everybody at CloudKettle, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks everyone.